We'll be talking about human rights abuses and violence. Now, today we're examining the recent human rights abuses and violence in Nigeria, and there are millions of ordinary people affected by conflict in Africa whose stories are missing in the mainstream media. Women and children have experienced different forms of sexual and gender-based violence in Nigeria, and statistics show that 6 out of every 10 children experience some form of violence. 1 in 4 girls and 10% of boys have been victims of sexual violence as well. A UNICEF report revealed that children who reported violence, no fewer than 5 out of 100 received any form of support. Now this brings to mind the recent murder of the producer and 3 others who were found soaked in their blood in Guaranpai, Abuja a few days ago. In Nigeria, child sexual abuse is an offense under several sections of the criminal code as well. But it is a different story for Khadija Adamu, a 3-year-old girl who was raped by a 49-year-old married man, Baba Idi, who has been arrested by the police in Kano State, not forgetting the case of Hanifa Abubakar, the 5-year-old who was kidnapped and killed by her school teacher. Now we have in the studio, still joining us, Nuruddin Abdullah. Thank you for staying with us.
Thank you.
And we also have in the studio, Folarinwa Aluko, a legal practitioner and partner in law firm of Truman Rockwood Solicitors. Good morning, and thank you for joining us.
Good morning, thanks for having me. Thank you.
All right, thank you, gentlemen. I mean, quite a sad experience for some of the victims of this violence in recent times. And, it just raises a lot of questions as to why do you think, if I may start with Barrister Folarin, why do you think that it has become so easy for people to engage in crime and, hurt other people or kill other people in the country recently?
That's a very interesting question, because I think it's a question that requires want to take the psychology of the general population into account, and then of course you also have to look at law and law enforcement as well. In terms of psychology, I think in the last couple of years we've seen what you may call a reduction in the value of human life, or in the perception of the value of human life. And I think that, to a very large extent, is reflected in the news. Well, it's not the news, but it's the reportage of, the loss of life from, whether it's the bandits, kidnappers, or any of the various other elements. And of course, this is also heightened by the fact that social media has made this information accessible and available to everybody at all times. So I think to a large extent, there's this at the back of the minds of most people. It's almost as if a lot of people have been numbed. On the flip side too, the question of law enforcement, of law and order now, also plays a role, because one of the reasons why we have laws is to social engineer. So to find bad behavior, identify it, and then stop it. And one of the roles of our criminal law, our criminal justice system, is to also nip these antisocial behavior, and provide some sort of justice for the society, justice for the victim, and then of course also justice for the perpetrator as well. So there's a question as to, on the one hand, as you said, we've seen an increase. What's the psychological impact of that increase because one could also argue that it's not just an incidence of an increase in the number, but there's an increase in awareness now. So what's the impact of that increase in awareness on the individual, the average Nigerian? And then number 2, what's the response of, or how are law enforcement agencies responding or reacting to this increase, in the form of enforcing the laws that we have on the books, and specifically our criminal laws? How are criminal laws being used to catch perpetrators and then, if possible, prevent crime?
earlier you talked about, finding bad behavior, identifying it, and then stopping it. But, how can the law enforcement actually stop, such bad behavior when they don't even know who the perpetrators are? Like in the case of, the 4 friends in Guaranpai.
Yes, that's a fantastic question. And I think it goes to it's the function, one of the reasons why we have our criminal justice procedure laws is that the laws also, they don't just provide for, a lot of the time what the public sees is the end of the process where somebody is charged to court and then, the court process takes its course. But then before that, the law also provides for the process of investigation and, what you may call investigation and some sort of analysis, if you may. And that also includes a forensic process. The investigation process is based on intelligence, and that involves the society, the community as well. So, I mean, it's a very interesting interplay of several forces. So, on the one hand, I read about the Guaranpai Incident, and while I was a member of the Administration of Criminal Justice Monitoring Committee, in the FCT here, and one of the conversations that we had on that committee was the process. How does the police force, for example, how do they buy in, or how do they gain the trust of the people in the different communities in the FCT, such that information that is, information relating to crimes are provided by people without any fear, of blowback or whatever. And so the first thing is there has to be trust between the police and people in that community, because these people came in, I read the story, they came in, I think there was a security person to the, so these are people that can be identified. There will be cameras, perhaps, around. If they must have come from somewhere, and they went there, did whatever, and it was a very harrowing story. Yes, but the basic idea is that intelligence is the basis for the investigation process. It also means, there's a huge conversation about the police procedures and all of that, but I guess I'll just say intelligence.
All right. Let me throw this to Nuruddin Abdullah. Now, to be able to, curb crime or control crime, at least the judicial system is very critical. But if you look at the processes involved of seeking justice in Nigeria, how accessible would you say that the judiciary is to the ordinary person? So, for instance, you are a victim of one crime or the other, but how easy is it for you to actually access justice if you look at the processes that we have right now?
It's not an easy one, and more importantly, even before the judiciary, he spoke about intelligence. Is the police capable of investigating these crimes? Not long ago, I think within this Utako general area, there was a robbery attack in some apartments, and luckily there was CCTV, and culprits were identified and arrested. That is one. Even if every street is CCTV, to put it that way, you don't have a database of the people that commit the crime. It's a simple thing. He moves from Abuja to Jos, Borno, out of you, he's gone. But if, for instance, we have a database, a central database, that every single individual in the country is there. Facial marks, people that we see on movies, you identify him. You understand? That is one. And secondly, the police is grossly incompetent. I'm sorry to use that word. Grossly incompetent. Look at how they even treat crime scene. Even in our movies, very childish and whatever. They come to the crime scene and tamper with it. I don't know whether that thing has changed. The police has only one forensic lab based in Lagos. So we're talking about fingerprinting. There is a crime here, and the police came bare-handed, and they tamper with the entire seen. You understand? That's true.
So the issue of incompetence, is it as a result of funding now, or what, or lack of equipment?
Can they handle the equipment? Look at the characters we have on the streets. The recruitment process of the police is the beginning of the problem. Even criminals have been hired as police. Zero background check. In some Guaranpai, let me use this. A residence, a house belonging to the former President Goodluck Jonathan, was ransacked. By the same police officers who were deployed there to protect the house. They sold even his underpants and that of his wife.
In fact, yesterday I was seeing a tweet by Sheikh Hussaini where he said the former Vice President Namadi Sambo's phone was stolen, at an event somewhere in Kaduna.
So what I'm saying here is this: a lot needs to be done. The judiciary is the last bus stop. I'm not speaking for it. I'm not saying that the judicial system, is perfect, but the judge is there. The judge cannot be your witness. You have to prove your case. And again, if you are poor, let me cite an instance, a case being pushed by Daily Trust in Sokoto, the Sokoto girl, which one Randy hit a wrong guy, hit with a car, and she lost a limb. It took journalists to do multiple stories to even bring the guy into custody. The guy was not even arrested because his family, he belongs to a family, they were higher up. So all these are the issues. The judiciary is the last bus stop. Again, let me give you a simple example. When this Yoruba agitator, what is his name? In Ibadan, he's now in Benin, right? Igboho. When the DSS raided his apartment, they arrested some people, his boys or whatever. They were arraigned here. There was a report, media report, that the prosecutors of those in his associates, the case was told, they were not there because they said that the case file was stolen when they boarded along a taxi, even from Massacre and what have you. And the case file was stolen. And they were facing terrorism charges. So this is just an aperture, to how the prosecutorial issues, are being done. The judiciary is just the last bus stop.
Okay, Barrister, now he talked about the judiciary being the last bus stop and saying that, the law enforcement agencies or the police are incompetent. Now, what about in a situation where, the law enforcement officers have actually done their job and it goes to court, the case goes to court, and these people are actually remanded in prison. But you have the prison wardens, striking a deal with these people to pay a certain amount of money to leave, the prison, the correctional facility, and then return when it's time for, the case to continue or the trial to continue. What about in such cases?
I mean, we have all heard stories, some of these stories, and the truth of the matter is, just as our guy here said, that there's a problem with our criminal justice process, and that problem is a multifaceted problem. Now, I was chairman of the Nigerian Bar Association, Abuja branch, and during my tenure, we engaged with the correctional facilities. I think it was even during my tenure that the names was changed from prison to correctional center. And so you find a situation where along the process, so there's a value chain, there's a criminal justice value chain that starts from investigation, and is supposed to end with reform, because the objective of our criminal justice system is to reform, yes, and correct. And that's, it's reflected in the name, correctional. And so the process of trial, and in a hypothetical situation, the evidence has been gathered, the investigation conducted, the accused charged to court, or the defendant rather charged to court, and they're remanded, and then you have a situation where, either for one reason or the other, there's a leakage at the correctional center. I should state first that there are times when, the right to personal liberty is a fundamental right that everyone has, even somebody who is a defendant in a criminal trial. Now, there are exceptions to, or there are times when that right can be, when the court can deny a person the right to bail, for example, or place conditions on which a person should be, granted bail. I should mention that there are instances where people are granted bail, and then, of course, the story that goes out is that, the person was released by a correctional center, or paid money to leave the correctional center. But I would say that at the moment, there is, if there are any credible reports about such, of course, yes, we all hear stories, and in one or two instances, we've tried to find out the veracity of some of these stories, but we're yet to actually verify or have an actually verifiable instance of such a situation. That's not to say that it's like the absence of evidence is not the evidence of absence, So it doesn't mean that that's not to say it doesn't happen. But we, on our own part, the Nigerian Bar Association has made efforts to actually get one or two instances where, to validate these stories. And like I said, I am yet to find any particularly, not credible, but particularly verifiable instance. But in any event, because if the court denies a person bail on certain conditions, there's a presumption that, in capital offense cases, bail is not a right. It's not granted as of right. But in other cases, it's granted as of right. So in those situations, that the court would deny bail because that person is perhaps a menace to society. And so when it is found out that the person, the defendant, is actually out without being granted bail, and it's a huge problem, and it's something that our system should.
All right, so how would you say that politics is impacting on the administration of criminal justice in Nigeria? We've had stories, like you said. We'll always hear stories, how that some people are above the law, how that some people, because of political connections and all of that, they can go ahead and do certain things. Recently, I've had cases where people are arrested in a particular place, and they insist that they be transferred back to a certain state, and all of that to be tried, and all that. So when you hear such stories, it raises a lot of suspicion and all that. So how is politics impacting on administration of criminal justice?
I think politics is a major factor in criminal justice everywhere across the world. I think we can start by laying that as the basic premise. And I'll reference you to the United States, for example, which is held up as the bastion for rule of law. And you have situations where I think the home of President Trump, past President Trump, was raided. There are allegations of criminal behavior here and there and all that. So bringing it back home to Nigeria. So there are complaints that there's criminal behavior in the corridors of power. Nothing is done about it. Now, bringing it back home to Nigeria, one of the basic premises or tenets of the criminal justice system is that justice should be done to all without fear or favor. And it's part of the oath. It's one of the oaths, or it's one of the components of the oath, that the judicial oath that judges take. So it's that important. And the trust in the system is, it is built essentially on that premise. So the question now is, what is the status of our criminal justice system, the actors, from investigation right down to incarceration and correction? And you will find that, quite unfortunately, the police should be at the center. The police really, in any country, is the central point of the criminal justice system. Unfortunately, our police force has been emasculated to a large extent. You find that many of their powers have been stripped away or have been, decapitated, if you may. You have, of course, the Road Safety Corps. You have Civil Defense. You have so many agencies playing out some of the roles that the police should ordinarily play. And then, of course, talking about hiring, within the police, the process of hiring, recruitment, of discipline, The Inspector General of Police, for example, cannot discipline senior police officers. That has to be done by the Police Service Commission. And then there are issues between, there's the Ministry of Police Affairs, there's the Police Service Commission. You know, there are many issues.
That also leads us to another issue. I mean, in recent times, we've seen that conflict between the Police Service Commission and the Nigerian police and all of that. And sometimes, you know, it comes even to the public glare and it becomes very embarrassing. Issues as simple as the issue of recruitment, you know, discipline of officers and all of that. How is all of that impacting, you know, on these things that we're talking about, criminal justice?
Okay, I think very briefly before I comment on this, let me just go back to what my learned colleague said. Let me just give you one instance. A Yahoo boy serving term in Kirikiri maximum prison. From his prison room, pull up a $1 million racket. While serving there, you know, his wife gave birth twice. The story was that he has a hotel that he goes in Ikeja and he doesn't come at will. So that's for the correctional service. I think on the issue of discipline, hiring, and what have you, our situation is not any different from what obtained elsewhere. The Department of Justice in the United States is responsible for the FBI itself. You understand? So I don't know why ours is different. It's simply because of corruption. And imagine this. Do you know why that's a sort of a separation of powers? Because of efficiency. The racket in the police anywhere in the world is not a one-man thing. It's a more or less like a cell. It's a system. The boss is aware. He has his court. So how can you discipline an officer? Let me start an instance. When the DNDLA indicted Abakari, our super cop, our Robin Hood, our Jack Bauer, a committee was set up reluctantly by the Office of the Inspector General of Police. He reports to the Inspector General of Police. That is, what do they call it? Inspector General of Police, whatever. The DIG is late now. What was the verdict? Despite the overwhelming evidences presented before them, what they were even doing was just to derank him. I think a step on the law. When they brought the report to the Muslim Smith-led Police Service Commission, and even the Minister of Justice, they said that the Attorney General was very angry. He said, what is this? They didn't touch all the hush puppy issue, all the issues with the monies even found on the younger brothers, on Carrie's younger brothers. The boy was not even invited. More than 400 million. He has no pure water factory address. He is not a teller.
Okay.
You understand? So finally, what happened? They whitewash him. You understand? So it has to be, it took the intervention of the Police Service Commission and the Ministry of Justice, to even bring him to justice. So that is why you can't leave justice and disciplining and what have you in the hands of the police.
All right, Barrister, let's talk about, violence and abuse against children or minors. We all know the story of Hanifa. We all know the story of the 3-year-old girl that was raped to death, by her 49-year-old neighbor. And then, the lady in Anambra who had, a child in her care and she beat to death and dumped her body in the bush. Now, what special procedures or instruments are there for the protection of children against, such abuses or violence?
I mean, these are very terrible situations, to hear about. First of all, I think the basic premise is that our criminal code has provisions that protect people from, or that at least provide some sort of criminal redress. In addition to that, we also have the Child's Rights Act, which happens to be a law that applies within the Federal Capital Territory. But then, as a function of advocacy of organizations like Clean Foundation and co, has been domesticated, if you may, within most of the states. I think at the moment there are about 5 states that have not domesticated the child's rights, that have not enacted their own child's rights laws. And now the Child Rights Act and various laws create special rights for minors, for children, you know. And I think one of the first things that it does is it defines who a child is. And I think, you know, for the longest time, that was one of the biggest problems that we had in our jurisprudence, especially with regard to the protection of minors. The definition of who is a minor, you know, who is a child. There are different laws that define the age of majority for different purposes. The Land Use Act has its own definition, you know, and different other laws have their definitions. The Companies and Allied Matters Act has its own definition. But what the Child Rights Act seeks to do, or what it does, is it creates a blanket definition, which is anybody who is below the age of 18. You know, and it's a very, very major point. And then, of course, it also provides for additional rights, you know, the right to security, the right to education, and so on and so forth. And I think then you also have the Violence Against the Person Act, which has also been reenacted in almost all the states. I think, I'm not sure of the number, but about 8 or so are yet to fully domesticate it. So I think in these situations, the perpetrators, you know, should be, and rightfully so, charged in consonance with these different laws, because the child rights laws, where they apply in the states, I think of the 5 states that have not domesticated, you have Bauchi, Kano, Zamfara among, you know, the 3 states. There are 3 among the 5 rather. But from the states where these laws have been domesticated, you know, and reenacted, the perpetrators should be charged accordingly, you know. And again, it's really unfortunate to hear of these situations. In one of the cases, the girl, the victim, there was a parade that was conducted, and on seeing according to the reports, on seeing the victim, she began to she panicked, you know, and started screaming, and then from there she fainted, was rushed to the hospital.
Okay, so you know, let me just interject here because of our time.
Okay.
We've heard reports about the reluctance of governors signing death sentences. Now, some of these cases, there have been court injunctions to that effect. There are certain death sentences that have been issued by the court and all that. But when it gets to that level, and the man who is supposed to append his signature to ensure that justice is served is not doing so, what then happens?
The death sentence is a very political issue, and it's not political within the context of Nigeria alone. I mean, it's political within a global context, because to a very large extent, there are several movements across the world that are against the death penalty, especially when you look at the general trend of human rights and on a global level now. And so you find a situation where even when the courts, you know, pronounce the death sentence, the governors, because to avoid, you know, having to appear before the International Criminal Court in the future.
But these are the laws.
Yes.
And until they are changed, they remain the laws, isn't it? Maybe Nuruddin will help us with it.
Yes, I think it is not only these cases he mentioned. Check the Hanifa case. Yeah, there was sentences and conviction by the court of the first instance. But don't forget that that case has to reach the Supreme Court. And you know, minimum, maybe with now, let's say minimum 5 years. Minimum, decided, on the average. More importantly, again, there are he said less than 5 states have not domesticated the Child Rights Act. But even though that they did, the enforcement is almost nil. Minus Lagos. I stand to be corrected. Lagos has special courts. You remember that Yoruba actor, whatever?
Yes,
Baba Ijesha.
A speed, you know, the speed up. There are special courts.
Again, that's another problem. The pace, you know, of the processes again. Is that something that also contributes to the issue of, you know, the rise in the number of criminality?
Well, I mean, Mr. Nuruddin was talking about, I think in terms of the pace, there are a number of factors that determine pace. Mr. Nuruddin was correct in terms of the fact that Lagos has special courts, but I think the Baba Ijesha case was expedited also because of the media attention. So I think the media also plays a very huge role in, you know, fighting or championing these causes. I think also investigation is a major issue because we're talking earlier about forensics, and that's why I wanted to bring up, I think it was Hanifa's case, the issue of the process of investigation.
Yeah.
In cases where the abuse is of a sexual nature, you know, how do you preserve that? There are general rules. This is evidence that can be destroyed within the first 24 hours. So there are issues around, you know, the enforcing the laws in a way that ensures that, you know, you can protect the evidence where such abuse is actually recorded.
All right.
Thank you
so much. Yeah, thank you. Unfortunately, we have to go. A lot to chew, really, but we have to go because of our time. Thank you so much for joining us on Daybreak. Folarin Wa-Aluko, legal practitioner and partner in the law firm of Truman Rockwood Solicitors, and Nuruddin Abdallah, editor, 21st Century Chronicle. Thank you so much.